So in this class, what we are going to discuss is the basics. Okay, very basics. Okay, so we'll start from the scratch. So we'll look into the how the Mule flow is actually communicating with the Mule runtime and how it passes on that message from one component to another component. Okay, so if we go ahead and create a Mule project, simple Mule project, and you'll get a so let's create it. Okay, very simple project we'll go ahead and create. So we'll get a Mule project with required libraries. Okay, whatever libraries are required to run this project, all those things will be automatically given by the wrapper which are there on the Eclipse. Okay, so left hand side, you'll see a project is getting created for us, where we'll be seeing this project is completely Mavenized. We'll be able to see there a pom.xml. We'll see the proper structure, folder structure over there. So if I take that, okay, so I'll go to my working set and I'll add that project over here. Mule basics, add, yeah. So if you look at the project, all the structure, and as I mentioned, whenever you create a empty project, this HTTP and socket, these dependencies will be always there. If I open the pom.xml, if you open, go down here, these two plugins will be always there. We have discussed this project structure, dependencies, and repositories. Okay, and plugin repositories. So let me again repeat. So these four candidates over here, these are the properties of a project. Okay, so group ID, your asset ID, that is nothing but artifact ID, version. These three things are generally we call it coordinates. With these three, combination of these three values becomes the unique ID of our project or any asset in any point platform world. Okay, and how you are packaging it, that value will mention over here, whether it's a policy, whether it's a connector, whether it's a Mule application. Then if you want to use the properties, custom properties, these are project properties. Okay, custom properties, if you want to use, for example, your Mule Event plugin version here, 3.8.0. Okay, this is the latest version. Okay, which covers your CloudHub 2.0 aspects also. And then to build the project, okay, to build the project, we need two plugins. What are those? First one is Maven Clean plugin. So it will clean the previous build artifacts, assets, files. So whatever junk was created by previous build, it will clean this. Then if you want to build and deploy, this plugin will help. Mule Maven plugin. We call it MMP in short form. Okay. And if you want to automate the deployment, we configure one tag over here called configuration. So it will show you here. Okay. So we'll take the configuration and we'll configure here whether I want to deploy to the CloudHub, whether I want to deploy to the runtime fabric, whether I deploy to the on-premises. We'll configure accordingly based on our deployment requirement. So we'll configure here what we want. Okay. Then these two plugins will use for the build point of view. Now these plugins will be using some dependency to run this project. Okay, so one of the dependencies is your module. Inside your module, we'll be having HTTP, will be having Salesforce, will be having database, will be having blah blah blah. So the connectors will be dependencies for your project, and by default we are getting these two dependencies by default, even if you are using it, even if you don't use it. These dependencies will be pulled from some repositories. So those either from our MuleSoft public repository or specific to your account. So for account, we'll get the repository, which is our exchange, and MuleSoft also give a public repository. Okay, for this too. So for this, we don't need any credential to connect. For this, we need a credential to connect. Okay, then these plugins and the dependencies will be coming from this repositories. Okay, so as I mentioned, these two repositories, one is your plugin repository, one is your dependency repository. Clear? This will be a structure of your pom.xml. Okay, which is very, very important file. And this pom.xml makes our project Mavenized project. Okay, so from outside, I can go ahead, use the Maven commands and run and build and deploy my project. Okay, so all API lifecycle stages I can achieve via Maven. Okay, implement, build, test, and deploy. So you can see here, this is the pom.xml file. We'll discuss it. Okay, now rest of the thing we have discussed in the last sessions. Okay, I go ahead and I'll now start with very, very basics. Okay, so you see the first file, we'll get it here under source main mule. That will be your file, main file. Okay, where we have three views here. Okay, so message flow, global elements, and configuration XML. In MuleSoft, okay, your code, most of the time it will be there in XML. Unless you write any explicit code like your property files, like your HTML files, like your JavaScript, like your Java code. If you are writing custom code, then only you'll be using some different extension. Otherwise, completely XML. Clear? So this is the one file you'll get it when you create a project. One more file you get it, log4.2j.xml. This file will be used to externalize the logs either on the console, or you can go ahead and externalize to the external target system like Splunk, ELK. Okay, yeah, just a second. I'll just surgeon call, I'll take it.
I cannot hear you.
Now you're able to hear me?
Yes, now I.
Okay, so from this configuration, from this log4.2j.xml, it will allow me to logs either it's a business logs. Okay, I want to log, let's say, business messages. I'll go ahead and use it. So by default, there will be appender for rolling file. And this rolling file will be used to log in console. Okay, and if you are deploying it on Cloud Hub, the size of this file, it's by default 10 MB. Okay, and it will create the file name pattern in this way. Okay, so it will get created in a home directory. There'll be a separator over here, and then under logs, this file will be created. So this is a home directory. Then file separator is nothing but a /, and then logs folder, and under that you'll be having Mule. So if you see the project name, Mule-basics.log. So you'll find this file over there. Okay, and each line over there, right, each line will be in some format. Okay, the pattern is so some characters, and then which processor, and then event, and then correlation ID. With this pattern, you'll find each and every line in that log file, and that log file can go till only 10 MB, and you can have there 10 files. Okay, so once the 10 MB crosses, it will create new file. Okay, if that crosses 10 MB, it will create new file. It can go till 10.
Hmm.
And then
Okay.
old files will start deleting from there. Only at max 10 files you can see over there. Okay, so that's the reason, right? Your client, or if you're working for some client, they'll be having best practices to externalize the log or archive the logs after 90 days. After 90 days, those logs will be deleted from there, from your logs directory automatically. That process called purging. Okay. Then here in the logger section, you can go ahead and append those those references. So right now we are using file appender. You keep on adding those. So if you want the logs on the console also, okay, and if you want the logs in Splunk, then we'll be adding appender over inside here. Okay, and then that appender will get used here. Now, one very, very important questions. Okay, if you use this log4 2j file and if you deploy to Cloud Hub, what happens? This log4j.xml file get ignored by default. This file get ignored. Okay, if you want to use this custom appenders in your logging process, then we need to disable the Cloud Hub log first. Okay, I'm talking about specifically Cloud Hub. Okay, on Cloud Hub, this file get ignored. Cloud Hub will use the default Cloud Hub log4j 2.xml file, and that will only allow to log in Cloud Hub console. Log sections, you go there, you'll find all the logs only there.
Okay, we will add the Splunk and everything in appenders, right?
Yes.
So how we will create the path and
yeah. So yeah, again, you don't need to mug up. So let's talk about this. Okay. So logging, and this is actually custom login. Okay. And you want to externalize either to Splunk or ELK. These are log management tools or Cloud Hub. Now, let's say you want on all three. What you'll do? By default, if you go with the default approach only log to Cloud Hub. Whatever customization you did to the log4 2j XML, whatever customization you do, okay, if you go to the default approach, default deployment, the Cloud Hub log4 2j .xml file will be used. Whatever configuration is there, that will use. So if you want to use and send all three, if you want to use your log4j 2.xml from your application, then first there is a checkbox on your runtime manager that we need to disable. So there is an option to disable Cloud Hub logging. And for this, we need to contact MuleSoft support. Once you disable this and you want all three places logs, okay, then you need to add all three appenders in your application log4j.xml, and then it will send logs to Splunk also, ELK also, and your Cloud Hub also. Am I clear so far? We need to add these appenders in our log4j.xml file and then deploy the application.
Okay.
Okay. So definitely you need to have all credentials for Splunk, ELK, Cloud Hub is default.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll show you this how these appenders looks like how Splunk is there, how ELK is there, how Cloud Hub we can see that. Okay. But this is the basics. Okay.
Okay.
Is that clear now?
Yep.
Okay. So that these are the two files will be available over there in my empty project. Okay. Now, if you want to perform any operation, as a part of your orchestration or business logic, okay, you need a processor. It can be anything. It can be your HTTP listener, it can be your HTTP requester, it can be your transform activity, it can be a logger, it can be a database, but you need a processor to perform some operation. Okay, and to execute this processor, we need a scope. Without scope, you cannot execute this processor, and this scope is called flow. Without flow, you cannot execute any processor. Simply, I'll say logger. Can I execute logger without flow? No. Okay, we have different kind of flows. So first point is we need a scope. Then there are different types of scope: synchronous, asynchronous. Synchronous, whatever you write under this synchronous scope, that will get executed by single thread. Single thread, and it will wait for the execution of that processor. For example, I have here processor. Then after this also there is a processor. Till the execution of this processor is not done, our thread from here, it won't go to the logger. If logger is not done, it won't jump to the next. So this one, 2, 3. So second activity will wait till first activity is not done. Once the first activity is done, then it will go to second activity, then it will go to third activity. And all these are processors. And this will be executed by only single thread, synchronously, one by one. Okay. Now within this flow, you can have async scope. Within your flow, definitely by default you need a flow. Without a flow, you cannot execute anything. Now inside a flow, you can have asynchronous scope also. So let's say this is your flow. Inside this flow, I'll talk about this section. What is this section? So here we can have processors. Inside this processors, for example, there are components which will give you another thread. Okay, this is called async scope. What do you mean by this async scope? So whatever activities you have here, I have activity here in the main flow here. So the main thread will be created over here. Main thread, let's say T1. So T1 will execute this processor. It will jump. It sees async scope. What it will do? It will simply jump onto this activity. Simply it will jump onto this activity, and this asynchronous scope will create one more thread, new thread, T2. Now in T1 execution time, T2 execution time won't get added at all. So whatever time required for this guy and this guy, that will be the execution time of T1. If anything goes wrong over here, T1 won't care because it's getting executed in T2 thread. If my flow is getting executed in transaction, okay, we'll talk about this also later. So transaction only covers activity, this activity and this activity. It won't care what is going here inside this asynchronous scope. Asynchronous scope never participate in any transaction. Clear? Thread, asynchronous scope, synchronous scope, flow. Clear?
Yes.
Now, if you look at the flow structure, we have three different kind of scope. Okay, flow scope. Okay. First one is, we call it flow only. So we'll just say flow. Second one is private flow. Third one is subflow. flow, private flow, subflow. Let's try to understand this, why these are there. Now, if you look at the actual flow structure, it will be like this. Here you'll be having processors. So to execute the flow, we need at least one processor. That is the minimum requirement. You need to have at least one processor. Even if you have longer, it is enough. To execute any flow, we need at least one processor. That is the minimum requirement to execute any flow. This is a source. Source is to use to execute this flow or access this flow from outside. Okay, by any another activity or even from the REST client. So we have different kind of sources. Okay, we'll talk about it. How many ways we can trigger our flow? There are multiple ways of triggering the flow. I'll discuss in a moment. So source activity will always have something which can trigger this flow. So I can say here triggers will add triggers. And here only the activities which can execute. So I'll name these activities like transform activity, logger activity, let's say DB select activity. Basically, these are operations. So this is processor section where your orchestration logic will be there. This is a source section which can invoke this flow. And finally, we'll be having here error handling. If anything goes wrong over here, okay, in this section, once the error is occurred, it will jump onto the error handling if you define any error handling. We have dedicated session to understand this error handling. Right now, we'll just say this is a section where your error handling will be there. So this is your flow structure. Okay. Now, this is exactly definition of flow. Source section is there, processors are there, error handling is there. Error handling is optional, guys. Okay. If you don't have, that's fine. If you don't have, it will be taken care by Mule runtime level error handling. Runtime level error handling. It will go Mule runtime. Okay. That is another story we'll discuss in the dedicated session. Exception handling in Mule4. We'll discuss there in detail. Now, if you don't have, if I keep this part empty, if I keep the source section empty, that means it will look like this. A flow is there. Okay. This section is empty. And we have processors here. This is called I don't know, my touch is not working properly. Just a second. Okay, this is the flow. And if I keep this part empty, and only I have processors here. And this is the error handling. Okay, so error handling also empty. This is called private flow. Okay, this is second type. I don't have any source. I cannot access or invoke this flow from outside. There is no way. The only way to invoke this guy via flow reference and data view. Data view script. Okay, we'll talk about this in a moment later. Okay, what is flow reference? What is data view? So private flow, they won't be able to access from outside. Within your flow, you can access.
So what is the use for this flow?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. Okay, so the use of this to, you need to do the modularization, just like we did it in API specific. And you remember, you wanted to create a specific flow for specific responsibility. For example, logging, for example, notification. And you wanted to have that, you want to call it from your main flow. This is your main flow. From main flow, you wanted to call via flow reference. So this guy will call this. I don't need any extra activity for that. And you wanted to handle their error handling at that level only. I don't want to propagate that to main flow. Okay. Now, third way of flow is subflow. Okay. In case of subflow, if I go to subflow, only processor section. No scope, no source. No. You won't find this section over there itself, first of all. Okay. So let me quickly show you all three. Let's go to our AnyPoint Studio. So as I mentioned, okay, if I want to have any processor, so let's say, for example, I wanted to have logger, right? That is the minimum requirement for executing any flow. See, automatically it creates a flow. See, there is a source section. If you let me delete this activity so that you'll be able to see here, source section, process section, and error handling section. 3 sections. Okay. So if I add source, if I add, just a second, it will take time. Okay. Once it is loaded, if I add a logger, this is a proper flow. Okay. Error handling is optional. Okay. As I mentioned, this is a proper flow. Now, if I go and have this is a private flow. So I'll name it accordingly. So this is flow. This is private flow. And there is a section. If you go to the core, it will show you. If you go to the scopes here, async scope, cache scope, flow, for each, all these are scopes. Okay, you'll find subflow here. Just go ahead and add it. You'll see there is no source section, there is no error handling section. Now you want to keep something which can be reused at multiple locations in your flow, or by multiple flows. We can keep that in subflow as a subroutine, which cannot be executed or invoked from outside, which cannot handle the errors on its own. This subflow will be very faster. I mean, as compared to the flow and private flow, it will be faster because it won't care about the error handling. It won't care about the source section, only processing. Okay, so there are 3 ways we can have. Now, the subflow can be only accessed via flow reference. You cannot access this guy from. So let me quickly take the screenshot. So if I okay, So this guy, we can invoke from outside because we have HTTP listener here. So I can invoke it from Postman or any REST client, any REST client. We can invoke by using flow reference. Even we can go ahead and invoke via data view. All three options are available for this guy. First flow. Okay. So first can be invoked by this guy, can be invoked by this guy, can be invoked by this guy. Second flow, I don't have source, only it can be invoked by this guy and this guy. Okay.
Yes.
And third one, even I don't have source, it can be only invoked by so this is second, this is third. The third, which is a
No reference.
subflow. Only option is flow reference. Okay, now invoking via Postman, invoking via data view, invoking via HTTP. Okay, I forgot to add that HTTP requester component also you can invoke. Point number one. So flow. We can even use HTTP requester component to invoke that. Flow reference, HTTP requester, data view, and Postman. Okay, so the main flow, we have two ways to invoke it. Okay, invoking via flow reference, invoking via HTTP. We literally see the difference between these two guys, okay? In coming sessions. Am I clear so far?
Yes.
So subflow won't have its own error handling, no source section. It just has a processor and it will be used as a subroutine, okay, which can be reused by multiple flows. Okay, hope that is clear. The flow.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Now, every module, okay, every module, if I open any module, if I go to my AnyPoint Studio, so let's go to HTTP, okay. Now in HTTP, there'll be operations and there'll be a trigger, okay, or trigger, or you can say source. Now if you take those, right, now let's drag, okay. If I drag a listener at processor section, can I add this? No way. See, so for trigger or source, there is a special section. This source section only you can add it. If you go and say request, can I add request at the source section? No. That means each module has a separate activity. Operation as well as source. Okay. So source will go to source section, operation will go to operation section. Clear? You take any. So if you go add modules, you go and add database. Go ahead here, drag it, and you go to database. Now, which activity from here can go to source section?
Update.
No, source section. I'm talking about this section.
Okay, query single.
No,
I think
only this on table row. So this source section will be listening, right? Something, this section will listen. Whether you are hitting from Postman, it will listen. Whether something is getting updated in database, that is the event, it will listen. So on table row, you can add over here.
Query single, can't the query?
No, query, inserting, executing, everything is a process.
Yeah, insert we can bulk delete, insert, update,
query,
execute, delete.
Right. Can I go ahead and add I can add it over in the processor section. I cannot add it in the source section. No way. Okay, other than this, yeah. So let me give you the clarity. Okay. So now we are going to talk about this source section of the part of flow. Now the source section is nothing but a listener, right?
Hmm.
So it actually listens for the events.
Yep, events.
Now this events could be, okay, let's categorize this. The first thing, it could be scheduler. So that means here I'm trying to trigger a flow periodically. So there is an event over here. Periodically.
Hmm.
Then something manually I'm triggering something. Okay. So from any client, manual trigger. Okay. So this can be your HTTP listener. And then on some event. So event could be record inserted in the database, record inserted or updated.
Cred, I can say. Yeah. Cred, create, update, delete.
Create, update, delete. Okay, not read. Okay.
Read, yeah.
File created, new file created or updated. Email received in inbox, right? Message inserted in the queue. That means new message. You can have this kind of stuff in your event listener section here in the source section. So if there is a record inserted in database, immediately this flow will get triggered. If a file new created or updated, this flow will get triggered. So where are this? If you go to your AnyPoint Studio, if you go database on table row, that means a new record is inserted in the table. Okay, over here. So that will come. Okay. So if I go to my add module, if I go and drag FTP, there'll be email. Just wanted to show you something, some examples. Email. If I drag an email, okay, and if I say on new email and just drag it here, it will go to operation section. If I go to database and if I say on table row, it will go to source section only. If I say FTP on new or updated file, if I trigger and add it here, it will go to source section only. And then finally we have scheduler. If you go ahead and search for scheduler here, right, you can add that. Just say drag it here, it will go to source section only. See, so these are the multiple sections where these are the multiple options which can go to your source section. Am I clear so far? Then what are the configuration we do? That is the rest of the part. In the coming sessions, we have dedicated session for all these things.
Okay.
Okay, but every module will have two kinds of operations. One will go to source section, one will go to processor section. Clear?
Yep.
Okay. Now let's come back to the basics again. Now, once you go to once let's say this flow got triggered. Once this flow got triggered. So for example, this is the flow. Now I have HTTP listener here. First example I'm taking. Now we have first logger here, logger component, and then I have transform component. Okay. Now from the postman, I triggered this flow. So let's say I deployed on my local host itself. So I'll say localhost colon 8081. Let's say hello. Okay, hello. So that means this URL will trigger this flow since it's running and it's deployed on, it's hosted on, it's hosted on a server. That means it's invocable right now, reachable with this URL. Now I got, so in this, if you see, this is called sending a request, a raw request. This request is reaching this listener. Now this listener's responsibility to convert this request into Mule event. When I'm triggering, I can trigger via get method or post method or all those methods, blah, 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 we have. Now this, based on this method, this Mule event will get populated. Okay, I'm talking about Mule4 event. I'm not talking about Mule3. I'm not going to discuss Mule3 at all here. Okay. Now in Mule4, there'll be multiple sections. The first section here will be attributes. In attribute section, all the, so whether it's a header param or query param or it's a uriParam, all parameters will go and sits under this object called attributes. So if you want to access headers, if you want to access query parameters, if you want to access URI parameters, you need to access via this attributes dot headers dot then your name of your header. Attributes dot query param dots your query parameter name. Attribute dots uriParam dot your URI parameter name. So your attribute section will populated by query parameter, header parameter, and URI parameter. Am I clear? Yes. Then we have a section called payload. Payload is the body. So from the request, if you're sending some body, that is the actual message you're storing over in the payload. Payload is again an object. Okay. Inside this payload, whether you're sending some body from your request or any attachment. If your email, you're receiving email and you are listener over here, that email attachment will get loaded over here. If you are reading a file, that file content will be loaded over here. So this payload will have attachment, file content, your request body. Everything will be loaded here in the payload. Then comes the section called variables. Now in Mule4, we have only one kind of variable, okay? In Mule3, there were different kind of variable. Flow level variable, session level variable, record level variable. And this attribute also, there'll be different thing, okay? Inbound properties, outbound properties, all those things were there in a different section. But now in Mule4, it's completely modified. We have only attribute section, then payload section, then variable section, and finally optional section will be there called errors. These 4 sections you will find. Okay, so this attribute and payload, sometimes we call it message. So message plus variables plus errors becomes the Mule4 event. Is that clear? Error section will get populated only when, or appended to this Mule event only when if your flow throws exception or occurred any error in your flow. Then only this error section will be visible in your Mule event. Otherwise, it won't be visible.
Can you explain attribute again?
Yeah. Okay. So let's draw a diagram again. Okay. Bigger picture. Okay.
And can you show in the real time as well?
Yes. We are going to see. Let's understand first. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll show you. Okay. So how it looks. Okay. Come on. Where are you going? I don't know. Somehow this guy. Okay. Attribute. Then payload. Then variables. And then error. In attribute, your headers, your query params, your uriParams. In a payload, I'm giving example file content, your email attachment. It could be anything, okay? File or PDF or whatever. I mean,
Object
yeah,
object columns
attachment or request body. If you're literally sending body in the post method, that all things will come here.
yeah.
Variables, once you create in your flow to store the flow specific, business specific data, once you create in your flow. An error, this guy occurs only when if your flow throws any exception. Now let's go ahead and see live. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a flow and try to understand this event structure. Okay, so let me delete all this flow for now. I'll just keep only one guy. So let's delete this. Let's delete this. Delete this. Okay. Now we have listener. So we'll go ahead and configure this listener. And I'll try to keep it very simple. Whatever by default we get it, we'll keep that as it is. And here, as I mentioned, I'll keep as a resource path, okay? And we have discussed this, how this resource path getting used in the URL, right? During our, okay. And then finally, I'll simply say a logger, okay? And in the logger, we'll just say okay, simple. So to want to see did we change anything?
Yep, flow name. That's why I think.
I don't think we changed anything. Just a second.
We changed the flow name. Mule basic to.
No, we didn't change anything. I gave Mule basics only. Okay, anyway, just let's leave it. Okay. Okay. So if you want to see the flow,
How can we check that what is change or what is not? Can we check that in Mule like XML file?
unless you source control, you cannot check it. Okay. So you can, I understand here. So previous copy, what was there, and now what I've changed, right?
Yeah.
So once you source control, no, then only you can compare those two copies.
Okay.
Okay. So to look at that Mule event, we need to run this flow in a debug mode. Okay, so let's run this in debug mode. If I run it in normal mode, it won't give you anything. The Mule event won't be visible to you. Okay, so we'll debug it and we'll put a cursor over here and we'll say add breakpoint. Just like Java code, okay? The way Java we execute these Java classes, we can put a breakpoint here. Very, very basic, okay? Very basics we are doing. Now see, it's getting deployed. If you see the console, this is the Mule home. It's getting, we talked about this Tanuki software also, if you remember.
Yes, right.
It's creating a JVM for us. It's setting all the JVM level properties from that wrapper config. It's saying that we are running in debug mode. Do you want to change the perspective? I'm saying yes, I want to change the perspective. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just adjust this. I'll bring this Mule debugger over here in this section. It's completely customizable, guys. Okay, so you can go ahead and drag and drop your windows. This will be your debugger perspective now. Okay, so it's running. If you look at the console, we'll wait for the deployment and we'll go to a postman. Let me build my request, simple request. So it will be http://localhost 8081/hello. This is what, right? So right now, I'm not passing any query parameter. I'm not passing any header parameter. I'm not passing any URI parameter. Okay, so let's see how my Mule event look like. Okay, so if I trigger, if it is deployed, it will come and sits, stop here for human intervention. Unless I say go, it won't go. Okay. Now let's look at how the Mule event look like. Have a look at it. Okay. Are you able to see my screen clearly?
Yes.
See what we have. We are on logger activity right now. We have not executed it. We are on that activity. See the attribute. This is the attribute section. These are the default headers coming from Postman. See, I don't have any header specific, any custom header. These are all our default header coming from the Postman. User agent, accept, cache control, post token, then host. What is the host? These are default. I didn't send anything. So if you see 7, that means there is no extra header. Okay. Then if you go down here, it will be other parameters. All these parameters are coming from the actual request. And the URI parameter, see 0. If you see query parameter 0, I didn't pass anything. A header, these are there because these are coming by default. Clear? Now if you see other than attributes, there is a correlation ID. I'll talk about this in a moment. Intentionally I didn't talk about it. I wanted to show you, and I was expecting answer question that Ashish, what is this correlation ID? Okay. Now in the payload section, nothing because I didn't send anything. And the where section, that is empty. Did you see the error section here? No. Because error section will come only when if your flow throws any exception. Okay, that scenario also we'll see. Now let's go ahead.
What is this root ID? What is this
root ID and correlation ID is same. Okay, so now let's talk about this correlation ID and root ID. Each and every execution of your flow, that will be identified by one unique ID always. And that unique ID will be created by your flow, Mule flow. Automatically it will be created by your Mule flow. In this format.
And how many times it will create? Like it will create whenever it will invoke, or it will
whenever your flow is getting invoked, and in the request the correlation ID is not there. I'll talk about that scenario also. So for example, your experience API is triggering your process API. So wherever you won't find the correlation ID, so first entry gate will be your experience API, right? That experience API will create a correlation ID, and that will get propagated to the process API automatically. You don't need to do anything for that. You don't need to write any code. If your process API is triggering system API, the same collision ID will get propagated to that guy. If you are directly triggering process API, then process API will create that correlation ID. So whoever is getting triggered first, the first entry, that will generate the correlation ID, that will get propagated to the downstream APIs. And this correlation ID will be used for tracking point of view. From where my call is invoked, started, basically the transaction, and where it went, what all APIs are invoked, all that will get tracked by this ID. So in other, we call it transaction ID also. Clear? Root ID, correlation ID, transaction ID. We name based on the scenarios.
And we use it for tracking?
Yes, we use for tracking. We use for log search. Because with this ID only all logs will be logged. If you remember, I showed you the log4j 2.xml, right?
Yes.
There, see, for the log entry, there was a correlation ID attached. Okay, let's say next. Yeah, if I say next, okay. So if you look at the console now, on the console, one log has been captured. See, this is testing. Now, if you see the testing row, complete row, see this pattern from where it is coming. So it's in the logger, this is a logger, processor name, right? Let me take you, let's copy this and let's try to map it with the log4j2.xml file. Just copy this line. Copy this line. Let me copy, Control C. Okay. And let's go to the, I'll change the perspective. Okay. So I'll go to Mule perspective. Okay. And if you open the log4j.xml file, okay, maximize it. Just below this line, I'm just putting that log. Okay. Okay. So now have a look at it. So definitely, since it is a info level, that's the info is coming here. Now, this date, Mule runtime, which thread it executed, from which flow it's getting executed, till this point, it's coming by default. Okay. Now see here, processor path. See here, then semicolon, event is captured by the correlation ID. Again, event ID also we call it. Event ID, correlation ID, root ID, transaction ID, it's same. See B4 2D, this is a correlation ID, okay? Then we have logger, that's a processor name, and then message. Got it? So this line will decide how the logs should be there in log section, whether it's a console or file. Okay. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's go back. Okay, I don't want to save anything here. Don't save. Now let's go back and change the perspective. Let's go to debug mode. Now this time, what I'll do, still it's running, right? I'll go ahead and trigger it. This time I'll pass header parameter. So let's say here I'm passing CT. Okay, I'll say Chennai. So I'm passing a CT header parameter. Now again, I'm saying send. Go here. Now look at the Mule flow now. The correlation ID is changed now. If you go here, now look at the header section. Now I have 8. Now you see there is a CT now. CT is equal to Chennai. Now let's go ahead and pass on. I'll stop it again. I'll show one by one. Okay. Are you able to see that is getting added? Now header is, let's go and add a query parameter. I say name. Okay. And I say Ashish. Now see in the URL automatically is coming question mark name Ashish. Go ahead, trigger. Now go to my flow. Look at the section. In the attribute section, definitely header will be there as it is. City is equal to Chennai. In the query parameter now, we are able to see 1. And if you go inside, see name is equal to Ashish. Query parameter is getting populated, header parameter is getting populated, and which section? Attribute section. Right? This query parameter and this header parameter are all maps, hash maps. You can see that hash maps. Query parameter, header parameter, URI parameter. Now to add URI parameter, there is a little, there is a difference. Okay. Now, can I directly go ahead and add URI parameter? Let's see whether it's possible or not. I'll say done. Okay. Let's go ahead. Every time, this is the second time I run and it's able to see the log as it is. And correlation ID. Okay. Check the correlation ID is getting changed every time. Don't think the last characters are not getting changed. Okay. If you see the first level, AA10, 1050, 89F0. This string is getting changed. Even this string is getting changed. The rest of the thing is not getting changed because it's randomly generated. So this part is fixed. This guy, this all time, I am getting different correlation ID. So your doubt is clear. Every time, new correlation ID, new transaction ID, new route ID, give whatever name, new event ID. Every time it will get created.
So whenever we stop and start the flow, I can
Yes.
say. And
Yes. Yep. So for entire journey of that flow, from start to till end, it will be only one correlation ID. Okay. Even you can change the way of generating the correlation ID. Okay. So I'll show you. Okay. If I go to, even you can change the pattern of this correlation ID. So right now I can go ahead to the global elements here and you can change it. I don't want to confuse you, but you can go ahead and really change it. Okay. So configuration, global configuration, and configuration. See here, correlation ID. You can say that here. Okay. So I'll just get the actual name. So if you wanted to, let's look at this. Okay. So this is a database script you need to give here. And I can say that, okay, there should be Ashish Mule basics. Okay. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. This is what, let's say I want the correlation ID always. And for uniqueness, you can add something here. So you can say ++, and you can say now, which will give the unique. This is how I want the pattern, let's say. Okay.
Timestamp, right?
Yeah, timestamp, because that is what it will give you. I'll just add my name and wanted to have unique logs for this specific flow. I can go ahead and say, okay. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, save everything. Okay, it will do the hot deployment. It will do the hot deployment. Okay, hot deployment means just application will get redeployed. Okay.
We don't need to start and stop at that time.
Yeah. So why it is saying? Okay. Okay, that's fine. So what error is saying? Null pointer exception. Yeah, that's fine. I don't have any global error handler right now. Unhandled due to prior send. Let me stop and just wanted to check, cross check. This is optional. Is there anything I can pass it here? No. that configuration option, right? This one. This is
Mhm.
for configuring our global error handler. Okay. Since I'm not passing it, it's throwing error.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that without that also it should work. Okay. Because I don't have global error handler right now. Why should I pass it? But I wanted to change this pattern. Generating correlation ID. Okay. Let's see. So we go to debug perspective. It will get deployed. It should not fail my deployment. Okay. Otherwise, failed. It's not allowing me to do that. Okay. So invalid correlation ID. It's throwing error on this, not on that. Right. So my, okay. Basically, I need to change little bit because this will give some colon and all that stuff, right? So we'll change little bit, and instead of this, yeah, we can write that script later. We'll go ahead with this value. Save this. Save. Because now function it will return the timestamp, and in that timestamp you'll be having lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Either I can go into now as a string, I can say, and I can do that, but so it will build and then it will deploy. Oh, this time it won't give any error. It's deployed now. Okay. All the, now if I go to my, go to debug mode and go to flow. From here, let's trigger. See here, it's waiting here now. And now see, look at my correlation ID. Are you getting it?
If we want to keep the same correlation ID, we can pass it like this. If you
Yeah,
don't
no,
want to
we need
change.
to add uniqueness. Okay. Otherwise, it
Yeah,
won't make any sense.
definitely.
Yeah. So I was
Definitely.
trying to add that, but little bit I need to add over there, right? Now then
Yeah.
as a string and
Creating
then
string.
format. Okay, from this string, I want only the unique part that I supposed to do there. But I wanted to show you that I can change that correlation ID.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so every
Got
time I'll get this one only now. Okay.
it.
So this point is clear. Attributes are clear.
Yeah.
Now let's go back. Let's go back and now try to send the URI parameter here. How we send it URI parameter? / and some ID, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how we pass, right? But will it work as it is? No. Let's try see what it will throw error. No listener. Okay, so I need to add a listener over there. How? I need to go and I need to say, okay, instead of this way, I'll just say, so this is actually my resource path, right? So if I want to add the URI parameter, you have to go to your listener. Okay, and after this, you need to pass curly bracket and you need to give a name over here. Okay, so I'll say just ID. Now this ID is nothing but my URI parameter name. Okay, now if I change this and save this, save all, it will get redeployed automatically. This is called hot deployment. Okay, it's building, 32% done. You can clean these logs also. Okay, so there is option here, see here, clear console. It will clean it. This option here, clear console. Yeah. It's redeploying it. Now it's redeployed. You can see that if this, you are able to see this all modules are loaded, then it's redeployed. Okay, so let's go to our, now I wanted to have this way, hello, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now if you go ahead and trigger, it will trigger your flow. See, it reaches over here. Now if you look at your Mule debugger, okay, see the attribute section now. Header, definitely CT is there. CT is equal to Chennai. In query parameter, name is equal to Ashish, and uriParameter, have a look at it. See, ID is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. Clear?
Yep. Okay, one more question. So when we do hot deployment, does the correlation ID changes? No, right?
No, correlation ID will be generated for every invocation.
Yep. Yeah,
It doesn't no relation between your deployment and correlation ID. Correlation ID, every time, even if you don't deploy, right, every time you hit it, you'll get different correlation ID. Right now we are configured, that's reason we are getting same, right?
Okay, got it.
So I'll go ahead basically and I'll delete this. Okay, I don't want this.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want this. So now if I'm making change, it won't create a server again. It will just deploy, because server is already running. You just need to build that jar and then redeploy it. That's it. And that is getting done by this guy. See here, build automatically. At project level, there is option build automatically. So whenever you save any changes, it will automatically build if you already ran that flow. Okay, while running, you are making changes and saving it, then it will go ahead and it will do that for you. See, it's getting redeployed. See, all modules are loaded. Now let's go ahead and now, okay, I'll make a change now. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that one more run and see whether the correlation ID is getting generated or not. Okay, just wanted to show you. See, new correlation ID. See, got it? I have deleted my part from there, and now by default it's generating this correlation ID. And if you are curious to know what is this value, this value is nothing but a function called UUID. There is a function called UUID. UUID. Just Google for this, you'll be able to see it will already generate the unique alphanumeric value. Okay, and the length will be this much. If I copy this, okay, always the length will be this. How many characters? 32 characters supposed to be there. Let me drag. Control V, remove double quotes. How many are there? 37. 36. Okay, 36 characters. That is the value. Always you call this function UUID function. It will give you the unique ID always. Okay, alphanumeric value. Clear?
Okay. Yep.
Correlation ID is by default is asking for UUID. Okay. Now let's try to trigger this guy. Now why it is not? Okay. Stop it. What I will do, how can we access these guys? Okay. So if you go here and now we'll go to module, core, you can go ahead and add it to the favorite, then it will be available. So then frequently using components, you can add it here. Okay. So now you can see set variable. Okay. And we'll add a transform activity here to access this. Okay. So always try to use the best practices. try to make your code little readable. So in your display names, okay, try to add this information. So you don't need to go inside that activity and see what kind of method I'm calling. Okay. One more thing. Right now, if you go to the advanced, right now, by any method, I can trigger this flow. Get method, post method, put method, delete method. With any method, I can go ahead and invoke this flow. If you want to restrict, okay, if you want to say only get method allowed, okay, then you can go ahead and add it here. Only get method is allowed, then go ahead and in advanced section, add that method. Otherwise, you can go ahead and trigger this flow with any method. Logger, we are just adding one logger over here. Set variable. Now I'm going to create one variable. I'll just go ahead and say, I'll just say last name. Okay, and I'll just add my last name over here. Okay. In transform activity, we'll try to have detailed session on this guy. Oh, we have dedicated session. Right now, I'll just use my stuff. Okay. You don't need to worry about it, what I'm writing here. Okay. So here I'll go ahead and I'll say, okay, what is CT? That is a colon. Then how we can access that CT? You remember what is that parameter? CT is a header parameter, right? So how I'll do?
Yep.
I'll just say type and control space. It will give you option. And if you press a dot over there, it will give you all the attributes access. See here. So from here you can access. What was that? My query parameter. Remember? Query parameter or header parameter? Header parameter.
Header parameter.
Right. Header will be somewhere headers, right? Now in your name, let's say in your name is special character is there, underscore is there, or space is there. You always go ahead and add double quotes and give that name. But right now we don't have. Okay, best practice, use double quotes and then pass the name. Right now what we have? City, right? Comma.
Yeah.
Then what is my name? My name. Now what I'll do? I'll use the query parameter attribute dot query params, right? See, if you go here, query params dot name, right? Automatically it won't come because from there it won't be reading. Now I'll say plus plus. Now how to access variable? Vars dot. Okay. Now see where's, because I am creating internally, that's where I can select it. Okay. So it's throwing me error because it's thinking like, hey, this query parameter can return me a null value. So I can use default and I can say space default. Okay. So now it will allow me. Now finally, what we have uriParameter, right? So I'll go ahead and I'll say employee ID, and I'll go ahead and I'll say attributes dot uriParams dot ID. Okay, let's go ahead and deploy this. Okay, so we are trying to access everything right now. Debug again. Save everything. I'll put one more breakpoint here. Go to debug perspective. It is deployed successfully. Let's go ahead and trigger our application. This time what I'll do, I'll pass the body also so that we can see something is coming here or not. Okay. So go here and say JSON and simple something. Okay. Right. So everything is now configured and we'll see what all we are able to see. Okay. So if you go to the Mule debugger now, look at the event now. Now see the payload. See here, payload also coming now, right? Attributes, all the attributes again. So since I passed the body, now few extra headers also added. Connection type, accept encoding, and content length. Now query parameter is there, name is there. uriParameter, ID is there. Now variable is empty right now, right? Let's go to the next activity. On the variable activity, still variable is not created. If anything is changed here in the payload, no. Okay, right now payload is this. Payload is something which can be overridden. Okay, so there are some activities, you'll get some activities in your flow which will override this payload. So that is one of these this transform activities actually overriding my payload. So right now my payload is this key : value. Now it will get overridden by whatever we have written in this transform activity. Okay, so set payload is the one activity which can override your payload. Transform activity is one of the activity or processor which will override your flow. The outgoing processors, right, like HTTP requester component or database select, this will override your payload. So there will be processors, and this guy will be, this payload will be a overridden element in your Mule event. Okay, it will get overridden. Correlation ID, no. Variable, you can keep on updating the variables. That's where we are saying variable. Now if I go to the next activity, new variable will be created here. Now see, size one variable got created now. So logger, set variable, they are not going to change your payload at all. Okay, so the activity, specific activity will change your payload or override your payload basically. Now we'll go ahead and say next activity now. So new payload got generated, all the activities are accessed, and if you see the postman, see, have a look at it. City, Chennai, name, Ashish, Pardi, because I have taken some part from the query and some part from the variable, and then employee ID is coming from my URI parameter. Is this clear? How to access those?
Yes, a little bit, but I need to like go through again to check it. If I will have any question, I will let you know.
Yeah. Last thing from this session, I will stop. Okay, so now when we look at our flow, this is our source section. My request came over here. It generates the Mule event, and we have seen properly all the values were populated in their respective sections, right? Attributes populated, payload populated, variables populated. Till now, we have not seen the errors. Okay, we'll see that in dedicated session. Then we have seen the processors here, logger, transform activity. How come from this, the event generated over here, this event, this Mule event, is getting passed on to from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, and then finally came back to the listener over here, and from here it went back to the postman. We have seen, right? But how this is getting transferred from here to here? Mule runtime internally uses persistent VM queue. So whenever the Mule event is generated over here, it will get populated to VM queue. From VM queue, it will be read by this logger. This logger, if this logger is changing anything in the event, Then again, the updated event will get published to the VM queue again. Then next component will read from there, again publish it to the VM queue. The next component will read it from there and again publish it to the VM. So in the backend, Mule runtime is used the persistent VM queue to populate or propagate Mule event to the next component, next processor. That will be completely hidden for us. Every processor will be executed by different thread, okay, type of threads. Those also will be hidden from us. We'll see that which activity will get executed by which thread in one of the session. Okay. Threading also will see that which component will be executed by which which thread. What kind of thread pools are available inside our Mule runtime. This will discuss in coming sessions. Okay. But hope you got clarity that these are the basics I wanted to cover today, and we'll stop here.
Okay.